Last time I talked with Jess Stuart, I remember getting off the call and thinking, I want to be more like Jess. And then I remember thinking, I reckon she can teach me how. Jess has this way of speaking it's equal part conviction and calm. Like she knows exactly what she's talking about, but she's not trying to convince you of anything. It's just, it's true for her. And somehow that makes you start questioning your own life in the best possible way. Now, if you walk into a bookshop, you'll find a whole shelf of Jess's books, all full of big ideas and practical wisdom. You can turn on the telly in New Zealand and she'll be there talking about burnout, ambition, managing life and work together. You can go to a conference and she's probably keynoting on gender equity, leadership or well-being. Or maybe you've been part of one of her corporate programs, helping women lead through the barriers. Jess just gives enormous value wherever she shows up. But, and this is the part that stuck with me, there are stories Jess hasn't shared as much. I think we all have these, the stories underneath the work, the moments that shaped her point of view long before she started teaching it. So today we're doing something a little different. We're going back. We're piecing together the experiences, the beliefs, the turning points, the origin story that helped shape Jess Stuart into the magnificent, ever-growing bundle that she is today. Jess Stuart, hello.
Hi, Penny. So nice to be here. Thanks for that beautiful intro.
Oh, it was so nice to put it together. And I guess I want to begin at the beginning, which seems reasonable. What did life look like for you as a kid, Jess?
Oh, quite bland and boring, really, if I think about it.
Oh, tough.
Yeah, I was born in a village in the middle of England, which is a place that no one would ever go unless you lived there and you had to. And everybody looked the same, and we were from a small town. And so there was almost like this pre-planned script that I was kind of born into and to follow. And my parents were not well off. We were kind of working class, and my mum and dad worked super hard. And there was just this expectation that you would do the same and you'd probably live in the same village. And in fact, I'm the only member of my family that doesn't, now 43 years on. And so, yeah, it's quite prescribed, I guess. But for me, there was always this feeling of that's what should be happening. It's what's expected. And this whole other kind of, yeah, but this is me. This is the real me. This is all the things that didn't feel congruent in that life, but not underprivileged either, I've got to say, right? I didn't have that much hardship in terms of some of the challenges others face into.
What do you think you were learning about the world back then, Jess?
I was learning how to be safe, how to conform, how to make people pleased, how to make people like me. I was learning what role I had to fill as a woman in the world, particularly that part of the world, small town, rural upbringing, very conservative, traditional, Christian. I was learning a lot of shoulds. This is how your life should look like. But I also remember learning from a really young age this feeling of, yeah, but what if it could be different? Or what if it was different? Or what if I'm different? And so this struggle that stayed so long inside was, this is the planned script that you need to follow to be accepted, to be liked. And then this feeling of, I kind of feel like there's another script that I should be writing, but it's not safe, and nor is it encouraged or allowed. So for the very first few years of my life, yeah, it was very much follow the script, be a good girl, conform, make people pleased, proud, be liked, and that's your way of being accepted in the world.
What are some examples, or do you remember any moments that describe what that was like? That idea of this is what I need to be, this is who I need to feel like, or this is what I need to do?
Yeah, God, so many. I feel like one of my favorite things to do as a kid was to play football or soccer. And back then, that's not something that girls really did. In fact, my grandmother often used to say to me, it was quite unbecoming for young ladies to, slide around in the mud and wear shorts and kick a football around. But I loved it. And I was better than most of the boys in my class, but I wasn't allowed to play on the school team because there wasn't a girls' team. And again, constantly being told that this thing that I loved and was good at wasn't an option because of my gender. I remember our garden, as a result, I played a lot of football by myself. And our garden was perfectly shaped in like almost a football pitch, rectangular style with hedges down the side and then a big hedge at the front, which you could kind of use as a goal. And so that hedge ended up having lots of holes in it. And the hedgerows down the side of the garden, they were fir trees and they would overhang in a way that I would pretend it was the crowd. And I'd go and high five them all when I scored a goal. And I'd sit on the ball at the end of the match that I played by myself. And I would give an interview to Match of the Day. And it's really funny looking back because my interview was, this was obviously going back 30 years ago. My interview was about my privilege being the only female soccer player in the men's English Premier League and joining my favourite club. Because back then women didn't play football, and it wasn't even in my world of comprehension that I would play for England or a ladies team, because they just didn't exist back then. And so this constant like private life that I lived out for myself, which was probably the life I wanted, and then my normal life where I had to conform to being everything else that was expected of me.
Mm-hmm. I want to dig into that a bit more. Obviously, you were going to be a magnificent world-class football player. But what else did you dream of that your life might be when you were young?
I always had quite adventurous dreams. I think dreams that were perhaps above and beyond what everybody else had planned for me. I remember a career conversation at school. I was quite young at the time. I sort of thought that maybe being an astronaut sounded quite cool. Get to do a lot of travel, sounded quite different. And I remember the careers counsellor at school pretty much, trying to manage my expectations and pretty much telling me I had a choice of nursing or teaching. Or if I got really good grades, I might be able to work in an office like my mum. And so that's what I went on to do. But there was no conversation about all this exciting stuff that I thought could be possible in another world for another person who wasn't me.
Was there a moment when you had to give up on that adventurous spirit? And by the way, I love how you said that being an astronaut, quite a bit of travel, quite a bit. But I wonder if there was a moment where you went, like, I have to do what I'm being told rather than what I'm feeling.
There definitely was. And I don't know whether it was I can't pinpoint a specific moment in my childhood that landed. It was more of a resigning myself to, this is the path I need to follow, because this is how I'm safe, this is how I'm accepted, this is how I'm loved. And so for me, it was follow the prescribed version of success that everybody around me seems to be doing. So get a career in an office, earn good money, climb the ranks so you earn decent salary and get the status that makes people proud. Find relationships with men, the whole pressure around, as a woman, starting a family and settling down to prove your worth in society was certainly a pathway that I went down. So I did all of the things that this script told me I should. And then it wasn't until I got to about 30 that I realized my life had all the hallmarks of success in that regard. And yet I was deeply unhappy inside. And so there became this moment, this awareness of, this script does not work for me. This is not my script. And whilst I might be accepted by others, I never felt like I belonged in that script. And I think that was the big catalyst for having tried to follow the script and fit in and do what good looks like. Actually realizing that I needed to write my own script and define what success looked like for me across work and life.
So when you were doing the things, you were following the success script, what were you doing? Who were you? Who was Jess then?
So I was in an HR office at the time, so I worked my way up in the HR career. Incidentally, I never went to university, so that was always a big sticking point in my family that I could have and should have and didn't. And that was maybe the first sign of me thinking, oh no, I want to do things differently. And then, of course, I got tied up in the status, the career, the company car, people saying how successful I was. And so followed that to the point at which I burned out and was not successful. And then life-wise, I'd met a guy, we'd settled down, we'd kind of been together for 7 years, we'd emigrated to New Zealand by this point. But again, deeply unfulfilled and feeling like I was doing all the right things that this script had offered that I follow for success at life. And yet inside, I often describe it as like there was a hole in my soul and my job was suffocating me. And yet I didn't see there was another option. And that's kind of, yeah, when I hit the wall and it all came tumbling down.
I want to get to the wall because it's quite a moment, but how aware were you of these symptoms, I guess, of something missing? And what were the symptoms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because I think for a long time, totally unaware. And almost like there must be something wrong with me because I'm doing what everybody else has told me is success and everybody else around me seems to be doing it. And so if I can't make this work, then I'm failing as a human, I'm failing as a woman, and I'm never going to be accepted by society or those around me. And so there were signs looking back now in hindsight. There were signs around my mental health, my how I treated myself, the way I talked to myself, my confidence or lack of, the way I tried to always change who I was to fit my surroundings. So almost like not have an opinion of my own because I was so desperate to reflect other people's opinions back to them and make them happy and like me. And so those were the signs, I think. But the ultimate signs and the more awareness that I got was obviously as I aged and things I started to see people doing things differently and wonder, oh, could that be for me? I started to travel. So I got out of my small rural village and started to see the rest of the world and other opportunities. And I guess stepping out of everything I'd known almost gave me a blank canvas to go, oh, well, what would I do now given no one's watching and I could do anything I liked? What might be next? And so those kind of OEs and career breaks and adventures started to give me another glimpse. And I was becoming more aware as well because I was growing and developing as a human. I'd started to consume self-help books. I'd started to meditate as well. So I was kind of getting this self-awareness of these little ideas and things that I was observing in myself that I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. That's different.
I love that idea of no one's watching. Is there a moment or an example where you remember seeing someone or hearing someone say something and thinking, oh, could I do that? Could I be that?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was on my OE, incidentally in Australia, and I was at a backpacking hostel and chatting to lots of new people as you do, and there was a group of girls going out that night, and I was like, oh, where are you going? I might come with you. They were like, oh, well, we don't know whether it's your kind of place. And then they were going to this gay bar in Sydney, and they were like, you might feel uncomfortable. And I was like, oh, well, look, I'm curious to come along and just kind of hang out. And back where I'm from, that wouldn't have been available as a place to go to, but it certainly wouldn't have been something I was comfortable with others seeing me do. So I think that sticks out as an example of no one's watching, no one knows me here. So why don't I just go along and see? And then, of course, you get open to actually, there's all these people in the world that are doing things differently and they seem quite happy. And what's that about? And so it kind of piques your curiosity.
In the work that you do now, Jess, how often do you hear people talking about these same symptoms that you experienced?
Yes, often, all the time. I reckon there's a massive piece of we are so busy trying to validate ourselves externally, i.e., make people proud, get people to like us, succeed at our careers, because of this lack of acceptance inside, that it drives all of those behaviors I've seen in myself play out over the years. And I often hear people talk about work, I'd love to change my career, but this is what my family are proud, or this is what my dad did as a job, or this is all I know, this is all I'm trained for, or I'm too scared, or this relationship is one I've outgrown, but it's familiar, I know it, we've got kids, it's safe. There's so much of that conversation that comes from this is my path that has been planned for me, rather than if I had this script, how would I rewrite it? And I love the analogy of authoring because I write books. I often think about when I sit down to write a new book, it's like a blank canvas that you can paint anything on. And we, all throughout our lives, we have this opportunity to turn the page of the book. And when you've got that clean page, it's like, what would you write on it? Because if we don't write anything on the page, someone else writes it for us. And then we just end up living out this life story that often we get to the end of and go, what would I have written? Or if I had a new book in the series, what would it contain. And I think that for me has always been this new page. And I still do it now to myself, new year, new page. What am I going to write? What's happening next in my life? And if I don't be intentional about that, what's going to end up on that page?
Just excuse me while I try and find my journal and find a blank page. But I mean, you were halfway, not halfway, you were a little bit of a way through your book, following this story that someone else was written, saying, I could change, but what happened to get rid of the but and to write the new page?
Probably the only thing that could have happened, I was so enmeshed in that story and so far along that the book pretty much had to catch fire for me to turn the page. And it did. Right? It did. Everything came crashing down pretty much all at the same time. But I think had it not have happened in such a way, it would have been too easy for me to keep putting it off into the future.
So take us to that moment where it came crashing down.
So this fire that happened, it was at the same time that I ended up leaving my job, leaving my relationship of 7 years, coming out, having no job, redesigning my career. All of this stuff happened at once. And I guess the catalyst for that was this hitting of the wall, which was diagnosed as burnout and you've overworked, but was actually a result of, because life was a dumpster fire, I'd thrown myself into work and tried to distract myself from all these feelings and all these problems in a way that it's almost like I needed to overwork so that I could get myself some help and support. And I needed to come crashing down and set fire to the book so that I could rewrite a new story and rebuild from that point.
Was it like you needed something visual as the excuse to be able to do it?
Yeah, I think there was two things. I needed to tear it all down to rebuild it, but I also needed the space and time to do that. And I think a burnout recovery certainly gives you, you're forced to take that space and time, and you're forced to think about, how do I do things differently? Because clearly how I've been doing things hasn't worked.
How did your body tell you that there was something happening in your mind that you maybe didn't want to hear?
It's interesting because I feel like sometimes it's not a quick flick of a switch. You don't wake up one day and go, oh God, I've got burnout. It's a slow burn. So it's often hard to pinpoint. And when I look back, there were certainly signs of how I'd kind of withdrawn from social circles and gone quite inwardly focused, how I'd stopped being optimistic and hopeful about the future, and how I'd kind of lost a lot of good habits, found a lot of bad habits around sort of self-soothing, particularly with alcohol and food, and how I'd lost motivation, right, for even the things that I loved, like going to the beach. And if there was a defining moment, it came in the form of a step class after work on the day of my 31st birthday.
Oh.
So
when all good things happen. Yeah.
I was busy trying to cram all these things in, so that I could be the good person who looks after their health and works really hard. And it was my birthday. And for some reason, I was in this step class at Les Mills gym. The music was pumping and I'd stepped off a step. I went to step back on the step and my knee just gave way, just collapsed. And so I ended up in this heap on the floor and I couldn't really move. And I just started to cry. And this is quite unusual for me. When I realized my knee, I couldn't feel a thing in my knee. I couldn't move it, but I also couldn't feel anything. So these tears were coming from something else. And it was almost like that physical event unlocked the opportunity to grieve some of the emotional stuff that was happening. And it also gave me the opportunity to, someone carted you off and took you to A&E and someone looked after you and then someone gave you a week off work so that you could think about it and rest and rehab. And all of that provided a backdrop for me to then deal with the emotional stuff that was starting to unravel whilst it was this physical thing that had happened to my body. So the collapsing of the knee was probably the unraveling. And it wasn't really about the knee, even though there was a physical problem that resulted in surgery further along.
How much easier did the physical symptom make it for you to be able to explain to people what's happening or why you needed time away?
Oh, I think a lot easier, particularly when I think about work. I think about the stigma attached to mental illness or to burnout or to any kind of breakdowns. I think about how I was able to use that as an excuse for time off The fact that I was bedridden for a while, that sometimes you can't tell whether it's knee and back related. You can't really tell whether that's physical or mental, right? And for me, it was both. And so that helped a lot. And it was almost a shield that I hid behind. And I noticed the difference when that shield was no longer there. So physically I'd recovered, but mentally I hadn't. And how friends and family would treat me differently in that respect. So as part of my burnout recovery, I took a year off. I went and lived in ashrams and retreat centers to learn a different way of being so that I didn't burn out again in the future. And the response from those closest to me is, look, we're worried you're having a bit of a breakdown. And what that ended up being was a breakthrough, right? And yet a lot of people thought that, taking myself off and doing this amazing year out that I had to recover was actually me going totally mad. And they were worried about me. It came from a good place, a place of, we need you to be safe and secure, and we don't want you to get harmed or hurt or let down. And so me having this adventure and doing this stuff that was off script was quite a concern for those around me when there wasn't a physical reason why that should be happening. And worried for my mental health, I guess, as well by that stage.
Isn't that interesting that when maybe people needed to be worrying about you, they weren't and they couldn't see it? And perhaps when they didn't need to be, they were. How do you reflect on that?
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because I think I wasn't even worried about myself when I should have been. And it was very much this keep up appearances. That's what a good grounding in a British upbringing gives you. The stiff upper lip, the keeping up appearances, everything is always fine.
Keep calm and carry on.
Even when it's not. Exactly. And so I was very good at hiding it, but I also didn't want to admit it to myself. And I think that's why the burnout was such a gift, because it forced me to admit it. It forced me to go, well, look, this hasn't worked. You need a plan B, because plan A clearly is not the one. And incidentally, when I was kind of having that year of exploration, I was happier than I'd ever been. And that was the point at which people were worried about me. I was training to be a yoga teacher, and I was fitter and stronger than I'd ever been. I'd lost weight because I was living in an ashram eating, just pure, healthy, organic food. And I remember going home and everyone being quite worried about how much weight I'd lost, because all of a sudden I was like this fit, healthy specimen that kind of didn't fit the script of what was around me.
Mm. I'm conscious of people listening to this and thinking, gosh, am I there? So if we go back to that bit before you went on your wonderful year, what did the messy bit look like for you? What was happening when you were having those early weeks off at home by yourself?
Very much, to be honest. A lot of sleeping, a lot of fog in the brain, a lot of I guess processing feelings of, well, God, I'm a total failure now, because look at where I've ended up. What will people think? How do I dig myself out of this hole? And I think for me, one of the biggest things that was going on was fear of the uncertainty to know, well, what's next? This is all I know. And if this is now changing and it looks like it has to, well, what does it look like? And how do I know how to change it? And how do I know if I'll get it right? How do I know I won't end up in a worse place than I already am? Should I just be grateful for what I've got? And how can I be successful and have drive and ambition without it coming at a cost to my health? Is this just the way it is? That was some of the stuff that was going on the inside. On the outside, it was a lot of me in bed being asleep and drinking cups of tea and biscuits.
What happened over the tea and biscuits, where the fear turned maybe to opportunity, or where something changed for you?
Yeah, I remember distinctly this feeling of, well, the current place I'm at has gotten so bad, it kind of has to change. So that started to outweigh the fear of, should I change it? Which I think had been the problem in the past. The fear was always too big. Now, all of a sudden, the place I was in was so painful, it had kind of overtaken the fear. And that made it a lot easier then to step into that fear, because it was almost like an upgrade of, how my life could be less shit. Is like by facing this fear that I'd put off for so long because I was so scared of it. Now I'm less scared because actually dealing with that fear seems like a walk in the park compared to dealing with this.
I mean, we're talking about some really tough stuff here. And I wonder how useful hindsight is now to see the through line. How do you work with people on this stuff now? How do you teach this stuff?
Yeah, that's and for me, looking back in hindsight, all this is obvious, right? The problem is it's not obvious at the time. And so for me, the two key things were the perspective and the space to have that perspective. So I think for so many of us, when we have challenges we want to face into, we get really busy so we can distract ourselves from them. And so then there's no space to consider anything else. And that works to a point, for a risk mitigation perspective and putting off that fear like I was doing. But then there comes a time where we want to sit and go, well, what could it look like? And being able to get help and support, particularly from another person, that's key in help, almost like being a mirror, reflecting back to ourselves. What else could this look like? Where is this coming from? And it's kind of helping us put our finger on something's not right, something's not working. What is it? And for me, it was about unpicking the behaviors behind my burnout, what had led to me burning out, the people pleasing, the perfectionism, the following the script, the wanting to be liked and accepted, and then having to go on that journey of going, oh, well, I have to accept myself first. And until that's happened, none of the other stuff can happen. And I think a lot of that helps us, for individuals in that space, to then go, right, okay, the clarity and the perspective and the space that we allow ourselves to get to that then gives us the courage to go, right, well, what's the very next small step I take that goes in the right direction?
That sounds really hard. It sounds like it takes a lot of courage, and I'd love to hear now about, the journey, to use that word, that you went on to redefine what success looks like for you, and to go through that messy middle and come out the other side. So you left New Zealand for a little while and you went exploring. What happened? Take us there.
Yeah. And I think it's such a good point. This isn't easy. It looks easy now because I'm 10 years down the track, right? At the time, it's been a messy middle to get to that point. And I vividly remember when I'd kind of been on this journey for 6 months and I was back in the UK. I was writing my first book, kind of, charting this story. And I'd done one of my first keynotes to an organization that do a lot of work on happiness. And I was talking about this, the stuff that I'd learned. And I remember one of the guys in the audience at the end of the session when they do the Q&A going, well, yeah, this is all very easy for you to say because clearly, you write books and this is your job and you've got a really easy life. And I actually shared with the audience because that very morning I'd been to the job centre to sign on for the benefit for the first time in my life. I was pet sitting because I couldn't afford rent. And I was volunteering to at the soup run for our local homeless community. And because I was pet sitting, I'd been there the night before, dressed in the outfit I'd worn to walk the dogs in a muddy paddock. And I was covered in mud and I'd got the backpack on my back, which had the flasks of coffee and the polystyrene cups. And one of the guys, because they all start to gather at the same spot when they know that we're coming to do the soup run, said, how long do you think they'll be? And, we proceeded to have a conversation as if I was also waiting for the soup run. And so I feel like sometimes we can look at other people going, yeah, they're fine, they've figured it out, and not understand sometimes the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And yet when I think about that moment and that day, I was happier than I'd ever been, even though all of those things were happening at the same time. And that's mostly as the 6 months that had led up to that point. So I decided that as a career, I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know what that was. So my approach became, well, let's go and just do all the things that you enjoy and see where that leads. And luckily for me, those things were also things that fit really well with recovering from burnout. So I was fascinated. I'd been learning to meditate as a way of helping my stress at work. And I was fascinated with Buddhism. And all the nuns and monks that I'd seen just looked so peaceful. And I wanted to know why and how. And so I thought the best way of doing that is to go and live alongside them. So I volunteered to teach English in northern Thailand to novice monks. And as a result, I got to live alongside them in their communities and learn way more from them than they did from me, probably. I trained to be a yoga teacher, which meant that I got to live in ashrams and places where I was getting the best care I needed for burnout recovery, but also learning some really good ways of being different, how drive and ambition can live alongside balance, and how we can regulate our emotions and control our minds and all of this stuff that I got so passionate about. That's what led me to, by the time I got back to the UK, 6 months later, to go, "Do you know, I want to write a book about this. I just feel there's so much gold in here other people could benefit from." And that was the first insight into the job I do now. And at the time, it was just a project that I thought I'd do because it sounded fun. And if I'm honest, it was a bit of therapy on the page as well. I was writing in a way for me to process my own story and the stuff I was learning. And that was the beginning of, the next 10 years.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Hearing about the things that you learned when you're in Southeast Asia. What do you make of having to learn those lessons 30 plus rather than when we are young?
Yes, I do distinctly remember, and ironic given I was in a monastery, but I do distinctly remember a period of outrage where I was like, why did no one ever teach me this? Why do we not teach this in school curriculums? You taught me about the Roman Empire and algebra, and you missed this bit out, like the most critical thing that would have changed my life and has changed my life. And not necessarily from a religious perspective or cultural nuance, but just the basics around our mindset, our emotions, accepting change and uncertainty and impermanence, the lessons that have stood me in such good stead, not just for my work, but for my life. So I do remember that feeling of like, that was a bit unfair that no one taught me this up until this point. But then also it ignited this passion in me for, oh my God, there are other people out there like me that are busy trying to follow a script, that are trying to be accepted by others because they haven't accepted who they are yet, that are trying to be liked and please everybody else and self-sacrificing in the process. So that became the turning point for, well, how can I share this with other people in a way that then they don't have to do what I did and go through that to get to the point that I was.
Whether it's the outrage, I love a rant, or the processing of what was happening to you. What do you remember about those months learning yoga, helping monks, and trying to quieten your mind?
I remember for the first time, it was a sense of freedom. There were no expectations of me. I just turned up and I just be me. And that was enough. And that's the first time in my life I remember that being the case. So there was a huge weight and no one was watching me. Nobody knew me. And I had this sense of, this is a blank canvas. And so this freedom to go, right, okay, this is plan B life. What do we want it to look like? And at the same time, I remember this massive fear of, well, I don't know what I want it to look like. This uncertainty, that there was a pressure on me to be like, okay, well, you've got this 6 months out, by which time you've got to have it all figured out. And you've got to have a plan in place for what option B looks like. But not just a plan in place that means you're successful, you can pay your bills, and that you've pleased everybody around you and that everybody is proud. And so that hadn't gone away. That was still there. And I distinctly remember sitting in a garden. I was actually in the south of France at this point, a plum village, Thich Nhat Hanh's place. And there was this beautiful field there where they've got statues of Buddha. There's about 20 of them, and they're all looking out over this hilltop. And when you look out over the hilltop, all you can see is fields of sunflowers and a little chateau in the distance. And it's idyllic. It's beautiful. It's the kind of place you imagine having aha moments. And I was sat in this. It was sunny as well, just to add to the kind of ambiance of the aha moment. I remember being sat in this garden and I was mulling it over and over in my head. I need to have it all figured out. I don't know what the future looks like, and I need to have a plan. I need to know what my next career is going to be, because I should be taking steps to make that happen. What if I end up lonely, by myself, with no money, and basically a failure? And then this realization came over me, and it was like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. And I remember it being almost like a voice saying, well, you can never know. So you don't need to know. And all of a sudden I realized that we never know what the answers are. We never know what's around the next corner. So me trying to have this control and keep it safe and mitigate all the risks by saying, I'm going to have it all figured out. All of a sudden there was this permission. No one has it all figured out, and you'll never have it all figured out. So stop worrying about it. And that was the big turning point around, okay, there is going to be a plan unfold, and I haven't got control over that. And as long as I'm pointing in the right direction, which I felt by that time I was, the rest will just unfold as it's meant to be. And that was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders, and a letting go of the control and the play it safe, play small, keep within the script.
I'd imagine the worry doesn't go away overnight, and no doubt it still happens now. How do you manage that ability to not have control, but also knowing that there's something in you that does want to have control?
Oh, there's still a lot in me that needs to have control. You only have to ask my partner that, whether it's how the dishwasher's loaded or what the itinerary for the weekend looks like. I mean, I think as humans, it's in our nature to seek certainty, to try and mitigate all the risk that surrounds us and to be safe. But I'm a lot better these days at balancing that, because what I've learned is that having such a strict control over things actually means that sometimes I miss stuff that, had I had a bit more fluidity and flexibility, would have presented themselves. So now for me, it's about having a plan that points me in the right direction. So, almost like on the compass, knowing which way the needle is pointing, but not having the whole route mapped out. So you kind of know roughly where you're going and what you want it to look like, but you can take multiple directions to get there. And I think that's important, because that's what life does for us, right? Those multiple directions. And sometimes you end up in a totally different place than you expected, but it's a better one. And I certainly feel like that's where I'm at right now.
I feel like it's the backpacker mindset as opposed to the package holiday mindset, where you might end up in these amazing places where, hadn't you taken that leap of faith, you may never have found. And I want to go back to where you are deciding to write a book and you're giving keynotes. How did you get to be doing that, coming off the back of what was probably a transformative experience, and thinking this might be the direction, I'm pointing in the right way?
Yeah, and I think this for me was the turning point between I'm just having some time out to recover burnout and I'm mapping the next phase of my life, and that this could work, because part of me thought that by the time I'd finish this time out, I would kind of have an answer, and then I'd come back and I'd have my energy back. I'd come back and I'd work on making it happen. I didn't realize that it was happening as I went. And so when I decided to write the book, I hadn't decided to publish a book. I was just going to write it. So I didn't even know if anyone would ever read it, or even if I'd share what I'd written. So at that point, it was a personal project, so way less skin in the game. And then I had enough encouragement from those around me who wanted to read it and thought that I had a good story to share, that once it started to get out there, then people started to ask me to speak about it. And I think that's when I realized there's something in this. People are interested. Other people have these struggles. Other people are looking for these answers. And I remember when the book first launched, and I went to do the first keynote, which was actually at the Action for Happiness Christmas party in Brighton in England. My gosh, more than 10 years ago now. And someone, a lady turned up, and she'd pre-ordered a copy through Amazon, and she turned up with the book for me to sign. And that's when I mean, the only person I thought that had read it or owned a copy was my mum, who proofed it for me. And that was the moment for me where I thought, oh, this work could make an impact for other people. Other people are looking for this stuff in the same way I would have been had I come across this 10 years ago. And so I think that's probably what then made it possible for me to think about this as a career or a next step, or something more than just me taking time out to recover from burnout and occupying myself whilst I did that.
That's incredible. What kind of, it's like you were writing what you needed earlier. I wonder what kind of comfort there might be, or what that feeling was in knowing that other people had experienced or were experiencing what you had.
Yeah, hugely. Because I think so many of us as humans, whatever we're struggling with, when it's a private struggle, we tend to then assume we're the only ones struggling with it because it's a private struggle. And as soon as it's not a private struggle and you meet all these other people that are like, oh yeah, me too, then you get this sense of, oh, okay, so this is actually quite normal. I'm quite normal. And I think also what I'd noticed in other self-help books that I'd read, I could see other women going on this journey before I did it. And so again, like, I think about that now when people are reading my books, and they're in the position I was 10 years ago, that's the start of their journey. And it's exactly the same how I was back then when I read the likes of, Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert or any of Brené Brown's books. And I was sort of thinking, oh, wow, this could be me. There are other women doing this. And I think that then gives hope and inspiration to others. And it also makes it possible as well, right? And I think that's the impact of this.
And I can hear the ambition is still there. I mean, that bit hasn't changed. You're talking about people like, Liz Gilbert, Brené Brown, but you also mentioned that your mum had to proof your first book, and we haven't checked back in on the people around you, how they were going as you were going through this change and how they were keeping up and how you explained what was happening to them. Take us through some of those relational experiences, I guess.
Yeah, because that's the big thing, right? We all worry about what people will think. And the closer they are to us, the more we worry about what they will think. And it's mum and dad have been on such a journey, as have all of those closest to me. And interestingly enough, all of those closest to me are still close to me. And one of my realizations is they love me for who I am rather than the person I'm trying to pretend to be or the conforming that goes around that. But that's been a bit of a journey for them as well, right? I think, I could probably split my friends and family down the middle in terms of half of them thought I was really brave doing what I was doing and half of them thought I was absolutely crazy and having some kind of breakdown doing what I was doing. And yet there's always been that support for, okay, we're worried about you and we're not quite sure how this is going to turn out, but you've got this covered, you know what you're doing and it's for you. And I remember sort of the coming out thing was probably the hardest for me. The career thing was a little bit uncertain in terms of communicating that to those that you want the approval of. But the coming out piece was massive. Rural community, we didn't really know any gay people, very Christian family. And funnily enough, I've never actually come out to my dad. So I've never told dad I'm gay, but my wife has stayed with us at his house several times and he attended our wedding. So I'm pretty sure he knows. And I reckon mum might have told him. But the conversation with my mum was the one that I left till last. So I'd kind of gone through different friends and family members, started with the people I felt most comfortable with, gone down to build up to the biggest one. And I got better at rehearsing the script and seeing the reactions. And I still couldn't talk to mum about it. And because she was proofing the first book, chapter 9 was all about authenticity. And I'd written about my coming out journey. And I'd left that chapter out of the proof pack because I knew that at that point that would be, again, having to be forced into doing something difficult. That would be the catalyst that made me have that conversation because I was struggling to not keep putting it off. And so one morning I was staying at mum and dad's house and we were both sat in our dressing gown and mum said, oh, look, I've just finished proofreading chapter 8 and it goes straight on to chapter 10. I think chapter 9's missing. And that became my cue to say, well, that's because chapter 9's about this and there's a conversation we need to have before you proof it. And that kind of opened up that opportunity for what I know wouldn't have been the news she was expecting or the news that she wanted to hear. And yet she's been amazing ever since and has had to come a long way in terms of grappling her own Christian faith and relationship with God and on all what sort of, she'd been taught as well in terms of how this relates to those around her, me, and how our life has changed. And I wouldn't swap her for anything.
It was a deliberate plant by you to take that out because you knew she would pick it up. Is that what
yes.
you're saying?
Yeah. And it was the easiest way of forcing myself into the conversation because every day I got up and I said, I need to have that conversation with mum about me being gay. It's not something that's easy to drop into conversation when the weather, the birds in the garden, what your Auntie Marjorie is doing. And so there was never a right time. And I realized there was never going to be a right time. She was never going to ask me, oh, by the way, do you think you might be gay? And so that was me setting that up, almost in a way like the burnout had happened. The burnout forced me to change my life. Leaving out chapter 9 forced me to have the conversation.
It's like a hack of your brain or something. I wonder if you're still setting up things in your life to force you to do the uncomfortable thing.
Probably.
That's honest.
And, when I'd done something bad as a kid, like when I'd put the football through somebody's window or, destroyed one of mum's favourite plant pots, I used to have a countdown. Like I'd stand outside the door and I'd count myself down from 5 knowing that at 1 I had to go in and tell them the bad news. So I'm sure I do a version of that now in, in my life and in my business. But I'm also in a privileged position these days that I've engineered my life in such a way, or designed it in such a way, that I don't do too much of what I don't enjoy anymore. I've gotten really clear on what I love. And yes, there's still challenges. Yes, there's still fear. Yes, there's still getting outside of my comfort zone. But my relationship to that has changed. Rather than seeing fear as a negative and something I need to avoid, it's almost like, well, this is the gateway to what's on the other side. And my experience has told me that that's a better place. So it's almost like something I can lean into now, rather than what I used to have to kind of force myself into.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, you wrote a book, you started doing keynotes, you were doing these things to force you into the next stage. Now you've got 10 books. You've got a very, very busy schedule, keynoting, working with a lot of people to help them. How did that happen over 10 years? That's a massive question. But I wonder when you realized this was really real and you really threw yourself into it.
Yeah, and it's a really slow journey over 10 years. So the first 4 of those years were just me hustling, writing, feeling like no one read anything, making no money. I would turn up to community halls. I'd put on free events and I'd turn up to community halls to run those events, and sometimes no one would come. And it'd just be me in the room with my presentation and a box of books, and then I'd pack it all up again and I'd go home.
How did you cope? How did you cope with that?
Oh, not always well. I mean, when you put yourself out there into the world, I wasn't hiding behind a brand anymore of a company or a role title. There's this direct hit of taking it personally, because it's like, well, people have rejected you because it's you're putting out there. People don't want to read your book. But there was part of me that knew it wouldn't be easy. It was almost like, well, this is just part of the process. Until you get known, you're not going to fill halls full of people wanting to hear you speak. And this is the way you get known. And I'd seen enough people do it to know that there was the hard work that had to happen first to then get the ball rolling. And that's certainly the process that played out. Enough of those, keep turning up, keep doing your thing. And because I believed in it so much, because I believed that this is stuff that will help people, this is stuff that people really want to know. And that kind of kept me going. And it's stuff I loved. I could be in a community call talking about this stuff to myself or to one other person, and I'd still be happy doing it. And so that, I think, helped that pick yourself up, go again. And I kept going again. And then it grew. And then when it started to get to a point where people would pay me to speak, and I'd be sharing the stage with celebrities who I would be thinking, oh my God, I used to watch you on stage, and now we're both on stage. That's weird. Those were the points where I started to think, oh yeah, no, this is a thing. This is working. This is progressing. It's heading in the direction that I thought success might look like.
What are the chances that comes with its own risks too? Being the successful person that you hoped that you would be.
Yeah. I had this moment actually not long ago. So I do an appearance on the TVNZ breakfast show. I have to get up at 5 a.m. to be in the studio and do all the hair and makeup stuff before going on screen. And I'm talking about work-life balance. And I just recovered from COVID. It was winter. It was 5 a.m. And I got up and like my body didn't want to move. I just felt like I didn't want to get out of bed. And I was like, oh, the irony. Here I am about to go on TV looking amazing and fabulous because they've made me up and they've got 78,000 lights to talk about work-life balance. And I'm hungover from COVID. It's the middle of winter. I don't want to get out of bed. And life feels bloody hard right now. But I think sometimes one of my checks for myself is, this is everything you ever dreamed of. So the pressure you feel with this job is a privilege. And for me, it's this learning about, yes, I can be successful and ambitious and have drive, but I do it differently. It doesn't have to come at a cost of me and my health and my sanity. And then some of that is the what I do, and that it fills me with joy and that it's more purpose driven. And so it's not such a drag and a drain. But the other part of that is how I do it. So for me, the balance that I have, the space that I have in my life, the way I've designed my work and the freedom that I get to do that means that Those two things can sit alongside each other. I thought they were an either or. You either have success and drive, or you have work-life balance. You can't have both. And my experience has proven to me that you can have both. In fact, I think it's the only way, because if you don't have the balance, you don't have the drive to get to the success. And I'm also acutely aware that, like, as the burnout expert that talks about work-life balance, you can't burn out again, right? It's a bad look.
You'll show up as a meme somewhere if you do that, Jess. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've heard about these, and I'm sure there's many more, but some big moments throughout your whole life that's led you to where you are today. What are the big messages that you want people to know? Like, what are the big things that you talk about that you think will ultimately help them be better at being them? I don't know if that's the right words, Jess.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly. And a lot of this is stuff I'm teaching myself all the time, right? I mean, it's so much easier to teach things to others than it is to do it ourselves. And I certainly find that with this stuff. So it's a constant reminder for me, as well as those that I teach. And I think for me, I've started to understand that less can be more, that ambition and balance are not binary, that they can sit alongside each other. I think one of the big aha moments for me was this journey of self-acceptance. So being who you are rather than who you think you should be. And when we accept who we are and love ourselves as we are, we stop this need for over-delivering, over-promising, trying to get validation externally because we don't have it internally. And that's been massive for me, especially being in the public eye now, because not everybody likes you. And, you know, the downside of having progress is that you kind of get trolls and other stuff that comes with it. And so getting that whole separation between when you feel like you're enough, doesn't really matter then what other people think. Whereas I was in a place where I was obsessed with what other people thought of me because I didn't think that I was enough. So again, driving that need to overwork and prove everybody right and over deliver. But I think the one thing that's really stuck with me, and it was from a monk actually in the kingdom of Bhutan, where I spent some time. And we were trekking up through the Himalayas to the Tiger's Nest Monastery, which is beautiful and perched right on the side of the mountains. It's also a very long way. And this monk, who was like 3 times older than me, but also 3 times fitter, he'd come all the way down to the bottom to pick us up, to trek us all the way up to the top. And we'd been going for about 4 hours. It was quite hot. And to manage my expectations, I said to him, "Oh, how much further is it to the top?" And he turned around to me and he said, "It is better to travel well than it is to arrive." And of course, he was saying, you've come all the way from the other side of the world to be here in Bhutan. You're in the middle of the Himalayas. It doesn't matter when you arrive, and it takes you away from the reason you're here, the present. And so for me, this is about traveling well. It's about how we get the opportunity to be present in our life. Because once we do that and we travel well, the destination takes care of itself. And so that's my constant reminder. Am I traveling well, or am I obsessing with arriving? Because that's such an easy thing to fall into in our busy, always on culture and society. When do we get to the goal, rather than the point of the goal is the journey along the way, and being present in that and making sure we're traveling well, because otherwise we get to the goal and we're broken. And I've been there and done that, and there's kind of no point. So yeah, traveling well is now kind of my mantra, and I think one that we could perhaps all benefit from.
And I'm sure that you've got the steps to everything that you've just outlined in your many books, Jess, that people can go and, you know, learn how to do themselves. What's next?
Oh, look, that's a good question, because part of me feels like I've worked so hard over the last 10 years to create what I've got. I just want to enjoy it now. I just want to do more of the same. And there's this drive and ambition that's always been there that, whilst I can point in a healthy direction these days, is never going to go away. So part of me is looking at, well, what if I don't write another book? What if I do a documentary instead? What if I retrace the steps of all of these amazing places I went in the last 10 years and the lessons that I learned and the experts that I learned them from? What if we bring that to life, not in the pages of a book, but actually hear directly from those people and see those places in a way that might help others follow the same path?
Wow. And the contrast of where your brain was then to where it is now. Wow. I mean, there'll be many more books after the documentary, Jess. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you today and go deep into your experience of being a human and learn about those lessons that have come out. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Penny. It's been a pleasure.